Good afternoon. My name is David Hamilton, and I'm the Group Vice President for Healthcare and Life Science with Global Logic. Once again, we're excited to be with you this afternoon and to be here at the VSE UnIT event. We're very, very grateful for the opportunity for sponsorship and to address this particular group and hope to continue this multi-year relationship. I'm really going to try this afternoon to bring you some excitement, some alarm, some humility, and maybe some challenge, all with respect to healthcare and technology. Before I start my presentation, I was sharing with my wife this wonderful opportunity to be with you this afternoon. And I suggested to her that in my wildest dreams, I never thought that I would be sharing a stage with this panel and with some wonderful speakers, particularly with someone like Steve Wozniak. And my wife looked at me with care and concern, and she said, David, I have some bad news for you. You're not in my wildest dreams. So as only a wife can, she kept me very, very humble. Let's jump in and go through the slides. So one of the things that I need to talk about really is where we are with respect to 2020 and 2021 in healthcare and technology. And it is really an all COVID, all the time type of sort of interaction and interplay amongst every country, every continent in the world. No one has escaped. No person, no family, no city, state, country, or continent is untouched. Geopolitics suggests boundaries, but as you will see in a slide or two, COVID and other forms of viruses really know no boundaries. Second, COVID has us all tuned in. It has us tuned into speed, and that'll be a theme that you'll hear through my presentation in the next few minutes. Speed to a therapy, speed to a test, speed to a vaccine or to a cure, the speed with which we can reopen our countries, the speed to being able to visit our mothers, our fathers, our children, and speed to heal and speed to grieve for those of us who have lost loved ones during this terrible, terrible time. Often in technology, we talk about speed with respect to clocks, right? Hertz, other measurements from physics and electronics, speed of light types of things. However, healthcare and technology don't exactly work in a synchronous way. And here are a few comparisons. So these slides will get us a bit grounded. So our universe is still expanding, and it's expanding in tremendous ways. We fly around the world. The SR-71, one of the fastest planes on record, but still is dwarfed in its speed by the Parker solar probe, right? Very impressive speed. And it wasn't created by the kinetic activity of its launch. It was created by the opportunity to slingshot around different planets. Getting a little closer to Earth, again, I love the automobile. We'd probably all like to have one, maybe two, but I'm not sure how practical 330 miles per hour is. As you'll see over the next couple of slides, it's really technology and science, not petrochemicals, not aviation or rocket fuel, not gasoline, that will provide a number of the improvements that we will need in healthcare so very, very much. As many of these speeds are impressive, we humans are a little slower. Usain Bolt, right? The fastest man in the world, tremendous speed, right, in the 100-meter and the 100-yard dashes. You might find that some of those previous speeds were impressive. As we start thinking about the human and our speed, maybe it's a little bit depressing rather than impressing. And if you're like me, or maybe like you, we're a little bit slower as we make our way walking or even running around our daily activity. Again, I have to continue to point out that our educational training for medical students is even slower still. It's not measured in miles per hour. It's measured in years, or in some cases, more than a decade. If you want to go to medical school and go deep into cardiology, particularly around surgery, you might be in a 10-year post-university cycle to gain the skills and the education that you need to work in that particular environment. As you get into healthcare, we further talk about different therapies and tests and medication that often take more than 10 years to get to market. So unlike our expanding universe, unlike the great speeds of our aircraft and satellites and even Usain Bolt, what a wonderful name for a speedy guy, we're just not going as fast enough as we need to go ahead. And let's talk about that. It gets a little bit worse. And this is a bit of an historical view about some of the things that we have to consider. I'll mention one. It's not really covered on the slide, but in the 19th and 20th century, back into the 1940s and 1950s, a disease called leukemia was not as well understood as it is today. It was called no more than a disease of the blood, and you died. There were very little opportunity to save you. And during the 40s and 50s, scientific research was done. Fast forward now 60 to 70 years, and now we have a cure rate that's in the 50% range. And in the pediatric leukemia, caught early, those cure rates are in the 80 to 90% range. So when you think about this, the advancements in medicine and science, etc., tremendous advances. And we'll even talk a little bit around this set of slides. Smallpox, right? Almost 200 years. Polio, 60. Tuberculosis, 58. COVID, we don't have a cure for COVID. Maybe we have vaccines, most operating in emergency use authority, not standard use authority. And all that said, we're well past a year. And even COVID, some of the first manifestations of COVID, not COVID-19, go back to 1965. So COVID as a virus has been around for that long, and we really only have this acute variation that's going on at the moment that we have to be very, very concerned with. And just, speaking about, COVID, we really haven't had anything like COVID for almost 100 years, back to 1917 and 1918 with the Spanish flu. The world was a very, very different place in those days. And many of the people who had experienced that tremendous illness are quite aged or are gone. We've lost them, through the normal progression of aging, illness, and death. But now we have front page news with COVID-19, and we have what is truly an existential threat. We have something that now we know that the entire world can go at risk, and the entire world can go at risk. If you look at this particular chart, not in years or not in a decade, a century, an era or an eon, but can go at risk in less than 6 months. Nowhere, no boundary, no one was and is safe. There's nowhere to hide, right? And for those of us that think Oceania, Antarctica might be a place to hide, I don't think that will give us much consolation and solace. And I've heard the weather is terrible, particularly as many of us in the Northern Hemisphere start to think about end of spring and into summer. In our lifetime, as we've tried to solve problems with respect to technology, we've had some giants. People who have done some wonderful things. Many of us in technology think about Moore's Law, the notion that effectively every cycle or every period, we will get double the performance at half the price. Tremendous opportunity. Buckminster Fuller, again, a futurist. We have a number of scientists, engineers, mathematicians, futurists that always seem to have our next answer, our next solution. And yet, if we think about Moore's Law, we're starting to see constraints to Moore's Law and maybe not being able to achieve the types of breakthroughs that we need. Kurzweil is a bit more opportunistic and a bit more optimistic as he thinks about his law of accelerating returns. And I would suggest that a number of you might want to take a peek at that at some point over the course of the next few days and weeks. In healthcare, different than technology, we have our own set of giants. We have Curie, we have Salk, we have Jansky, we have Hawley, we have Ventnor with the human genome, many, many others. And somehow we have to find a way to continue to get the best of the best from both these healthcare giants who are coming up with new discoveries almost every day, and our tax technology, which seems like it might still not have all the answers. More on that in a minute. This is the Kurzweil. One thing I would note for you is if you can read the slide, take a peek in the upper right-hand corner. Take a peek at the human brain. Take a peek at what we're trying to chase in terms of our advancements and the sophistication and the understanding that we're still trying to achieve with respect to the capacity of that interesting CPU that we call our brain. Maybe that'll give us a sense that we will crack this problem. And that said, the problem is still growing. We'll find that the problem is still increasing. The costs are going up around the world. COVID has brought to real life, even in developing countries, the notion and the need that while I may not have targeted healthcare, in some of our developing countries with as much resource, economic and otherwise, I really can't afford not to do it. Whether we be talking about China or India or Africa, we have to look at countries that have historically not been able to invest in healthcare, and COVID has brought that home. And we see it in the news, we see it over the internet, on TV every single day in terms of some of the tremendous cost. In the developing countries, it's our quest for the fountain of youth. It's our quest to continue to expand longevity, pushing it into the 70s and 80s and above with quality of life that we never experienced previously. Post-World War II, often many of us thought that age 65 or 60 was a retirement age, and very shortly thereafter, our life expectancy suggested that we moved on. But that's no longer the case. We really, though, have to solve harder and harder problems and more niche problems, which I'll speak to in just a minute. It's a spectacular time. Yet, this I found tremendously interesting. So Dr. Peter Denson, pretty well-regarded, well-referenced, peer-reviewed article. When we talk about the expansion of the universe at a tremendous speed, right? Maybe not measured in megaparsecs, but the expansion of medical knowledge, with the hypothesis that it is doubling in 73 days. You have to think about that for a minute. We think technology, as engineers, as mathematicians, as technologists, we think technology changes rapidly, hardware, software, other various innovations down to the silicon level. The medical knowledge through expanded research and discovery is operating at a tremendous pace. And if you think about my previous comment about the cycle of medical education, and sometimes taking as much as 10 years post-university for your training, you can imagine that your medical education and medical knowledge may actually be obsoleted multiple times during that 10-year cycle. Technology is not keeping up, right? How do we discover this knowledge? How do we codify it? How do we file it? How do we parse it? How do we index it? How do we retrieve it? How do we update it and put it to use? Because this information, this sort of connection of technology and healthcare does us very little good unless we can really bring it to fruition. So as you might think, is this a hopeless challenge? A perplexing riddle? Some would say a riddle within a conundrum. I am probably more optimistic than that, and I have maybe the platform and the opportunity based on my experience, with healthcare and with technology. But I have never been more optimistic at our opportunity to bring discovery to some of these hardest problems. And I'd like to sort of step through a few of what I think are our opportunities as technologists to really apply against these problems. And some of these are very, very practical, and many of you in the audience might be working on them right now or might soon be working on them. And I'm refraining from some of the advancements and actually an opportunity that many of you may have in the next few years as you no longer think about being technologists or digital engineers, but your skills and your opportunities also apply to computational biology and a lot of advanced principles in chemistry. And so I would suggest to many of you in the audience that your opportunity to make interesting pivots and to continue your own learning are quite remarkable. So let me step through a few of the bullets and take you through how I think those things will come together. So again, I just would suggest to you that a number of these things are just so powerful as we think about the work that we will do over the course of the next years. And as I mentioned, our technology toolbox is far from empty. In fact, while Gordon Moore might not have envisioned our future, many of our colleagues in the technology business are continuing to advance, are continuing to replenish our toolbox and come up with additional solutions for the work that they're trying to do. And I won't touch on all of these, but artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality. You're starting to see tremendous advancements in medical imaging, for example, medical robotics. A lot of work to do around artificial intelligence and machine learning. We have a tremendous amount of work to do with making sure that the data sets are credible, starting to think about their sophistication, getting into areas around bioethics, because this isn't just about trying to have the computer replace the human, but it's trying to match a bit of humanity with the work that we're doing, and there's still work to be done. So again, we have a tremendous number of algorithms and things that can be automated, but we still have many, many things. When we talked about that expansion of medical knowledge, doubling in 73 days, just when you think that your machine learning algorithm or your artificial intelligence is going to be able to encapsulate the problem and present that to a human being, think again. Think about how and what kind of updates and auto updating might be required to make that come on board. The notion, right? We seem to evolve our computing structures and architectures in interesting ways. And so over the course of the last, 5 to 10 years, right, we've developed, wonderful workstation technology, wonderful hybrid architecture around our simplest devices, our laptops, for example. A lot of it around gaming, right? If you think about what we've done to have acceleration and hybrid computing architecture to deliver spot resources to specific problems in terms of how we use esports, e-games, etc. So interesting, right? And we're just starting to think about supercomputing and hybrid computing clusters in very, very different ways, and trying to apply some of those technologies into some of the areas that I mentioned, biocomputing, some of the most complex chemistry problems. I'm not going to speak to every one of these, but the notion that 5G, right, still rolling out a bit slowly, country by country, but the notion of the speeds in 5G to get the information to and from the point of care. Tremendous advancements in terms of bringing speed of quality clinical information to the doctor and the patient in remote areas, to deliver quality information back in telehealth and telemedicine, some of the things that we've all had to experience over the course of the last year to 15 months. Tremendous opportunities. For those of us a few years ago who had our Fitbits and were trying to measure through pretty basic pedometers our number of steps as a surrogate for our healthcare, now the notion of your smartwatch and your smartwatch that can take your pulse, your smartwatch that might be on its way to be a pulse oximeter, and to try and measure the amount of oxygenation in your blood. The number of sensors and wearables that start to extend into patient monitoring in the home. Tremendous amount of additional opportunity for technology to help us. In the area of user experience and client experience, we're now about 10 years into a generation of electronic health records. Many of them that were built first around the acute care setting, built around the hospital. And interestingly enough, while the hospital is a tremendously intense place of care, a tremendously technological, sophisticated spot of care, the majority of healthcare actually goes on in the doctor's office, or in fact, in the home. And so thinking about the generations that evolved, they didn't always follow well the patient and the provider's workflow and engagement. It certainly helped us to codify data, to bring some structure, but it also created some industry burnout with respect to use of those tools. And so over the next few years, we're going to see a re-expression of many of those electronic health records, electronic medical records, into new ways of interacting, provider to the technology, provider to the patient, patient to the technology. And those things will be very, very important as we go to what I think of as Gen 2 in our EHR schemes. And then the final issue, right? A number of us have heard the phrase mass customization. So in healthcare, we start to think about populations and subpopulations. We tend to break down disease states into those that affect the most, and ultimately Pareto and filter it down to those that impact the least. but it's no less critical to be able to provide healthcare solutions to those smaller populations, particularly when those solutions are disastrous. And we're starting to see now in drug discovery more things going on with respect to things called orphan drugs, drugs that can be targeted not necessarily to the single person, but in fact to smaller populations, smaller communities at reasonable cost. We start to think about software as a medical device. We start to think about removing some of the constraints around the traditional manufacturing processes and embedding more and more on the silicon, right? Those areas and those opportunities that we as technologists think so highly about over the course of the way that we do our work and the way that we may participate and get closer to solving these healthcare and life science problems. So again, with this toolbox filling still virtually every day, just as we have more and more medical discovery going on in parallel, we have more and more technology opportunities that are developing. And as I said to you before, as I think about my wildest dreams, I think we still have lots and lots of work to do. So I will close as I opened. I think I tried to share with you, or I shared my wife's opportunity that I might not have been in her wildest dream. But certainly that coming together of technology and healthcare remains in mine. We all need to commit to it. And I would encourage anyone with strong technology background to come on over, to come into the healthcare and life science domain and begin to express more and more your energy and your opportunity in this space. With that said, on behalf of Global Logic, I wanted to thank you for your attention and patience this afternoon. I wanted to thank our event sponsors, and I'd be happy to take a few questions.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, to bol pán David Hamilton a teraz je čas sa ho popýtať niekoľko otázok, takže ak ste pripravení, tak si to šupnite doprava na slajdo, pošlite nám nejaké otázky. Hi David, how are you?
Having me.
Oh, thank you, thank you. We've heard a lot of things in your presentation. I'm really eager about the future and what is going to happen in healthcare. But then I walk into a doctor's office here in Slovakia and I want to cry. Do you think that even in Slovakia we have any chance to do these kinds of research? Do you think technology can help our doctors? Because they basically, a lot of them use typewriters and they're really in 1992 in their offices and in their heads.
Yeah, I think that that country boundaries and stages of development will always vary, whether it's from the U.S. to Slovakia to Asia to South America. You will always have variation. On the other hand, I would suspect that there really is no inhibition. I think using COVID as an example. COVID has taught countries, leadership, policymakers, I think, a lot of lessons. And really that impact to healthcare rolling then into the economy. I think, again, those countries that have struggled with, as a policy matter, investing in healthcare, and Slovakia might be one of those. I think the next few years we'll see sort of a recharging or a refocusing of some of those public policy initiatives.
Great. I'm hopeful that this is going to really happen. And I read a really long article about what's happening in India with the COVID situation. And there are people in the villages which don't have no access to healthcare. They need to travel 100 kilometers to nearest hospital. I think some of the things you mentioned can help. You can get the samples easily or more easier to people. You can get some kind of sets for sampling and for helping people. Do you think this technology can even help these people, like to take some small box with a lot of things included, and they can help each other and help diagnose, combine telemedicine and maybe small lab which you can take to a village, really distant village. Do you think, or do you have faith that technology can solve these problems, but doctor cannot come, the technology can come?
Yeah, I very much, again, remain optimistic. And I think, again, as an outcome of COVID, I think COVID will be a triggering event for companies, for diagnostic companies to think about no longer requiring a room-sized machine, right, to process samples. Because for them, right, it will be a market opportunity. If they can deliver sort of miniaturized, right, types of technology or portable types of technology into Africa, for example, or into India or remote areas of any country, I think those smaller devices will, in fact, with 5G, with other types of mobile communication, allow us to knit together again, healthcare communication and access in a much more powerful way. So again, I know terrible problems. I know in many cases we've all been sort of caught unaware at what a virus like COVID can do. And part of public policy and healthcare policy evolution, when it hits the front page, when it hits the internet, when it goes, very bad example, very bad pun, but when something like this goes viral, it wakes us all up, and the public policy makers, at their peril, do nothing. Again, as an optimistic fellow, I think we'll see some good progress in the next few years.
Hopefully, I'm looking forward to that also. And one last question. I don't know if where you're at, but here in Slovakia, a lot of people don't trust technology. They're afraid that we're going to inject chips in their hands. The COVID tests are chips infected that you want to control. I read an article or a Facebook discussion about a woman who says her mother can be seen on Bluetooth devices on her phone. That she after she was chipped with the vaccine. Do you think technology or does owe to these people something? Do you think that we can do something how to introduce, and that's 20% of people in our country that they really are afraid of vaccination because it was too bad. Do you think we can do something to help these people understand that the medicine is here to help, not to do wrong?
Yeah, you raise a great point. I think as healthcare people in general, we're terrible communicators. Again, it's sort of a scientific discipline. It's sort of a highly technical discipline, and what we often lose sight of are the multiple, sort of cross-cultural communication styles, right? That we need to manifest. If you want to talk to someone, you can't talk, doctor or scientist to scientist if you're talking to, again, my 80-year-old grandmother who's had a totally different life experience as an immigrant, for example, from one country to another, or who may not have been through 12 years of education or with no university education. So I think in addition to all of the advancements we need to make in healthcare, I think we've left behind a little bit this cross-cultural communication. You hear it called vaccine hesitancy right now, the chip in the arm that Big Brother is trying to infect us with. I think that's a function of this more recent learning that we just have to talk differently and communicate differently out of healthcare from our source of knowledge, if you will. And if we spend more time on that, I think we'll remove some of that skepticism.
I hope this happens, because if we lose the patients, homeopathy will luckily and happily take them. So thank you very much. This was David Hamilton. Please, big applause. Thank you, David. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.